The small transport ship moved slowly toward the massive space station. Inside the ship sat a single passenger. His name was Elias Vance, and he was the first human diplomat ever sent to meet the HFY Dominion. Elias looked out the window at the station. It was enormous. The metal structure stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of lights blinked across its surface like stars. Ships of all sizes moved around it like insects around a hive. He took a deep breath and adjusted his simple gray suit. He carried nothing but a small bag with documents and gifts. It's no weapons, no guards. It's just himself. The HFY had conquered 17 different species across the galaxy. They were ancient and powerful. Their empire had existed for 40,000 years. And now, they had invited humanity to talk. Everyone back on Earth knew what this meeting really meant. The HFY were not looking for friends. They were looking at humanity the way a predator looks at prey. They wanted to see if humans were worth conquering or if they should simply be ignored. Elias understood all of this, yet he smiled softly as the ship docked with the station. The airlock opened with a hiss. Elias stepped forward into a long hallway made of dark metal. The air smelled strange, like copper and old flowers. The temperature was cold, much colder than he liked. At the end of the hallway stood his welcoming party. Elias stopped walking for a moment. He had seen pictures of the HFY, but pictures could not prepare him for the real thing. They were tall. Very tall. The smallest one was at least 8 feet high. Their bodies were covered in hard shells, like the shells of insects on Earth. The shells were dark green and black, with sharp edges at the joints. Their heads had large eyes that reflected light like broken mirrors. Below the eyes were mandibles, sharp-mouthed parts that clicked and moved constantly. They had 4 arms each. The upper arms were thick and strong. Lower arms were thinner and ended in delicate fingers. All of them wore armor decorated with symbols of rank and achievement. The leader of the group stepped forward. He was the largest of them all, nearly 9 feet tall. His shell was darker than the others, almost pure black. Golden symbols were carved into his chest plate. This was Supreme Arbiter Zixtal, the ruler of the HFY Dominion. So, Zixtal said, his voice a deep clicking sound that the translator device turned into words. This is what humanity sends to meet us. Elias bowed respectfully. Supreme Arbiter, I am honored to be here. I bring greetings from Earth and all of humanity. We hope this meeting will be the beginning of a wonderful friendship between our peoples. Zixtal stared down at the human. His compound eyes studied every detail. He saw a creature that was small and soft. No natural armor, no claws, no poison. The human moved slowly and carefully, as if afraid of the world around him. The Supreme Arbiter turned to his advisors and spoke in their native language, not bothering to let the translator work. They send this, he clicked with amusement. Okay, a creature made of water and weakness. I could crush him with one hand. The advisors made sounds that were their version of laughter. Their mandibles clicked together in rapid patterns. Zixtal turned back to Elias. Come, human, we will show you to your quarters. Tomorrow, we will begin discussions. Elias nodded politely and followed the group deeper into the station. He walked with small steps, looking around with wide eyes like a child seeing something new. He flinched slightly when a door closed loudly behind him. The HFY guards exchanged glances. This was the best humanity could offer, this timid, fragile creature. Perhaps conquering Earth would be even easier than they thought. They gave Elias a small room with minimal comforts. The bed was too hard. The lights were too bright. The food they brought him later was clearly spoiled, though they pretended it was a delicacy. Elias ate what he could without complaint. He thanked them for their hospitality, asked polite questions about their culture and history. The guards reported everything to Zixtal. He is weak, the guard captain said. He complains about nothing, thanks us even when we insult him. He is afraid of everything. Zixtal nodded with satisfaction. Good. Let him stay afraid. When the time comes, humanity will kneel before us without a fight. But not everyone shared the Supreme Arbiter's confidence. In a dark corner of the observation room, an old HFY female watched the human through security cameras. Her name was Mithrix, and she was the eldest shaman of the Dominion. Her shell was gray with age, cracked in places, covered with symbols of ancient knowledge. She had lived for over 300 years. She had seen empires rise and fall, and she had spent decades studying the old archives, the records from species that no longer existed. Something about the human bothered her. She watched him sit alone in his room. He had stopped moving. His eyes, which had seemed so nervous before, were now completely still. He stared at the wall with an expression she could not read. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was not the polite smile he had shown the Supreme Arbiter. This was something different, something older. For just a moment, Mithrix felt a chill run through her ancient body. She turned to her scrolls and began searching. Through records that had not been opened in thousands of years, records from species that had encountered something terrible long ago, species that had left only warnings before they disappeared. The records spoke of creatures from a small blue planet, creatures that seemed weak but were not, creatures that hid their true nature behind soft skin and gentle words. Persistence predators, the old texts called them. Hunters that never stopped, never tired, never forgot. The text said these creatures had once been everywhere, and they vanished, retreated to their home world, and the galaxy had breathed a sigh of relief. Mithrix looked back at the camera feed. The human was preparing for sleep now, its movements slow and harmless. But she had seen that smile. She tried to warn the Supreme Arbiter the next morning. She came to him before the first meeting with the human and bowed low. "Great Arbiter," she said, "I beg you to be careful with this creature. The old archives speak of his kind. They are not what they appear to be." Zixtal clicked with annoyance. "You speak of fairy tales, old one. Look at him. He can barely walk without trembling. What threat could such a creature possibly pose?" "The archives say they hide," Mithrix insisted. "They always hide what they truly are. They've been hiding for thousands of generations. Please, my lord, do not provoke this human. Treat him with respect. Send him home with gifts and promises. Do not give him reason to remember what his ancestors were." Zixtal waved one of his 4 arms dismissively. "Enough. Ow. Your superstitions are not welcome here. We are the Kethvari Dominion. We have conquered 17 species. We fear nothing." Mithrix bowed again, but her old heart was heavy with dread. She had seen something in that smile, something ancient, something patient, something waiting. As she left the throne room, she whispered a prayer to gods she barely believed in anymore. "May he remain asleep," she murmured. "May he stay gentle. May we never see what sleeps behind those soft human eyes." But she knew, deep in her ancient bones, that her prayers would not be answered. The young warriors were too proud. They would push, they would test, they would try to break the human. And then they would learn why the old species left only warnings. They would learn what humanity really was. The first 3 days of negotiations were difficult for Ambassador Elias Vance, not because the Kethvari were harsh in their demands. They were, but Elias had expected that. What made it difficult was the constant, deliberate disrespect. They made him wait for hours before each meeting. He would arrive at the appointed time and sit in an empty room while the Kethvari delegates talked and laughed somewhere else. When they finally appeared, they never apologized for the delay. The food they gave him grew worse each day. On the first day, it was merely spoiled. By the 3rd day, they brought him things that were clearly not food at all. Once, they gave him a bowl of something that was still moving. Elias thanked them politely and ate what he could. They spoke about humanity as if Elias was not in the room. "The humans will make acceptable servants," one advisor said casually during a meeting. "Their hands are small, but precise. Good for detailed work in our factories." Elias said nothing. He simply smiled and continued presenting his proposals for trade and cultural exchange. This confused the Kethvari greatly. Why does he not react? Zixtal asked his advisors privately. "We insult him constantly. We treat him like dirt beneath our feet. Yet he keeps smiling. He keeps offering friendship." "Perhaps humans have no pride," one advisor suggested. "Perhaps they are truly as weak as they appear." Or perhaps, Zixtal replied thoughtfully, "they are simply too stupid to understand when they are being insulted." The advisors clicked in agreement. This seemed like the most logical explanation, but one Kethvari was not satisfied with waiting. His name was Kethros, and he was the youngest son of Supreme Arbiter Zixtal. He was a warrior, not a diplomat. He had won many battles and killed many enemies. And he hated the human more than he could express. Something about Elias bothered Kethros. He could not explain it. The human was small and weak. Yes. But when Kethros looked into those soft brown eyes, he felt something strange. A discomfort. Instinct telling him to be careful. Kethros hated that feeling. He had never been careful in his life. He had never needed to be. He was a prince of the Dominion, a killer of worlds. He would not feel uncomfortable because of some pathetic creature from a backwater planet. On the fourth day, Kethros decided to act. The evening meal was a formal event. Hundreds of Kethvari nobles filled the great dining hall. They sat at long tables made of polished black stone. Servants moved between them, carrying plates of exotic foods from conquered worlds. Elias sat at a small table near the back of the hall. He had been given the worst seat, of course. From his position, he could barely see the Supreme Arbiter's table at the front. He did not complain. He ate his food quietly and watched the Kethvari with curious eyes. Kethros sat at the high table with his father. Throughout the meal, he kept looking back at the human. His hatred grew with each glance. The creature sat there so calmly, so peacefully, as if he belonged here, as if he was their equal. Finally, Kethros could take no more. He stood suddenly, knocking his chair back with a loud crash. The hall fell silent. "I wish to make an announcement," Kethros declared loudly. "I wish to perform the ritual of challenge." Whispers spread through the hall. The ritual of challenge was an ancient tradition. A Kethvari warrior could challenge anyone they believed was unworthy of respect. It was a public humiliation, a way to prove dominance. Zixtal looked at his son with interest. "And who do you wish to challenge, my son?" Kethros pointed one clawed finger at Elias. "The human," more whispers. Some Kethvari clicked with amusement. Others shook their heads at the pointlessness of challenging such a weak creature. Elias looked up from his meal. His face showed only mild curiosity. In the ritual of challenge, Kethros continued. Walking toward the human's table, the challenger strikes the challenged one. If the challenge shows fear, if they beg, if they retreat, they prove themselves unworthy. They prove they deserve only contempt. Stopped in front of Elias and looked down at him. The human was so small, so fragile. Kethros could see the pulse beating in his soft neck. One good strike could kill him, but that was not the purpose of the ritual. The purpose was humiliation. "Do you understand, human?" Kethros asked. Elias nodded slowly. "I believe so. You wish to hit me." "I wish to prove what you are," Kethros corrected. "A weak, worthless creature that deserves nothing but slavery." When he spoke, his voice was soft but clear. "I would ask you not to do this. I have come in peace. I want only friendship between our peoples." "Friendship," Kethros laughed. "We do not want your friendship, human. We want your obedience." He raised his upper right arm. His forelimb was covered in natural armor and lined with sharp barbs. A single strike from it could cut through metal. The old shaman Mithrix watched from across the hall. Her heart pounded in her ancient chest. She wanted to cry out, to stop this foolishness, but she knew no one would listen. Kethros brought his arm down hard. The blow struck Elias across the face. The sharp barbs cut deep into his cheek. The force of it knocked him from his chair and sent him sprawling to the floor. The hall was completely silent. Elias lay there for a moment, not moving. Then, slowly, he pushed himself up to his knees. Blood ran down his face. It was bright red, almost too bright. And where it dripped onto the cold floor, faint wisps of steam rose up. Kethros stared at the steam. That was strange. The station was cold. Blood should not steam in cold air, unless, unless it was very, very hot. Elias rose to his feet. He did not cry out. He did not beg. He did not retreat. He simply stood there, blood dripping down his face, and looked at Kate's single quotes, Ross, something was different about his eyes. The warmth was gone. The nervousness, the timid uncertainty, all of it had vanished like morning mist. What remained was still and deep and empty, like looking into a cave that had no end, like looking into the dark space between stars. Cathros took a step backward before he could stop himself. "I have been very patient," Elias said. His voice had changed. It was quiet, but it carried through the entire hall without effort. There was something behind it, a harmonic undertone that made every Kethvari present feel suddenly cold. "I came here with open hands. I offered peace. I accepted your insults. I ate your rotten food. I smiled when you called my people slaves." He touched the wound on his face. When he pulled his hand away, his fingers were covered in that too bright blood. "But I wonder," Elias continued, looking directly into Kethros' compound eyes. "If you truly understand what you have just done." Cathros tried to speak. His mandibles clicked uselessly. No words came out. "You struck a human diplomat," Elias said softly. "You drew human blood in a public ritual of dominance. You did this in front of your entire noble court." He took one step forward. Just one small step. But Cathros stumbled backward as if pushed by a giant hand. "Let me be clear," Elias said, and now the whole hall could hear the ancient thing that slept behind his voice. "I do not want war. I do not want revenge. I came here hoping, truly hoping, that we could be friends." He paused. The silence in the hall was absolute. "But you needed to push," Elias whispered. "You needed to test. You needed to see what would happen if you made a human bleed." His lips curved into a smile. But it was not the polite smile of a diplomat. It was the smile Mithrix had seen on the security cameras. The smile that had kept her awake for 3 nights. "Now," Elias said, "I suppose I will have to show you." In the back of the hall, old Mithrix began to pray, but she already knew it was too late. They had woken something that should have stayed asleep, and now they would all see what humanity truly was. For a long moment, nobody in the Great Hall moved. The Kethvari nobles stared at the small human standing before Kethros. Blood still ran down his face. Steam still rose from where it touched the floor. And those eyes, those empty, endless eyes, held the warrior prince frozen in place. Then Supreme Arbiter Zixtel stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the stone floor, breaking the spell. "Guards," he commanded. "Seize the human." 20 Kethvari warriors rushed forward. They were the elite of the Dominion, trained killers who had never known defeat. They carried weapons made of the strongest metals in the galaxy. They moved with the speed and precision of a swarm. Elias did not try to run. He did not raise his hands in surrender. He simply stood there, watching them come. The first guard reached him and grabbed his arm. The warrior was 8 feet tall and weighed 400 pounds. He could crush rocks with his bare hands. But when he touched Elias, he stopped. The guard's compound eyes went wide. His mandibles clicked in rapid, meaningless patterns. He tried to let go of the human's arm, but his hand would not obey him. His whole body had locked up. "What is wrong with you?" another guard demanded. "Move aside." The frozen guard finally managed to speak. His voice was barely a whisper. I cannot look away from his eyes. There is something inside them. Something looking back at me." The second guard pushed forward and grabbed Elias by the shoulder. Immediately, he too froze. His weapon fell from his nerveless fingers and clattered on the floor. One by one, the guards tried to seize the human. One by one, they stopped moving. They stood around Elias like statues, their eyes locked on his. Their bodies trembling with an emotion they had never felt before. Fear. The Kethvari did not have a strong word for fear. They had never needed one. They were the conquerors, the dominators, the apex species of their region of space. Other creatures feared them. That was the natural order. But now, standing in the presence of this small, bleeding human, 20 of their best warriors were learning what fear truly meant. "What is happening?" Zixtal demanded. He stepped down from his high table and walked toward the frozen scene. "What have you done to my guards?" Elias turned his head to look at the Supreme Arbiter. The movement was slow, too slow, like a predator that had no need to rush. "I have done nothing to them," Elias said. His voice was calm and quiet. "They are simply seeing me. For the first time, they are truly seeing me." "Seeing what?" Zixthiel stopped walking. He was close now. Close enough to see the human clearly. Something was wrong with the human's shadow. The lights in the grate hall came from many directions. Every person, every table, every pillar cast multiple shadows in overlapping patterns. This was normal. This was how light worked. But the human's shadow did not match his body. Zixthal blinked all 6 of his eyes. He looked again. The shadow was bigger than it should be. Much bigger. It stretched out behind the human in shapes that made no sense. There were too many limbs. Too many angles. Too many teeth. The lights flickered. Every Kethvari in the hall gasped as one. For that brief moment of darkness, they all saw it. Their compound eyes were designed to see across many spectrums of light. They could see heat and radiation and wavelengths that other species could not imagine. And in that flicker of light, they saw what was standing in their great hall. It was not human. It was not anything they had words for. It was old. Older than their empire. Older than their species. Older than the stars they had conquered. It stood behind the human like a second skin, a mask, a disguise that had been worn for so long that the wearer had almost forgotten it was a disguised odd. Almost, but not quite. The lights came back on. The human stood there, small and bleeding, looking exactly as he had before. But now, every Kethvarian, the hall knew the truth. They had seen behind the curtain. They had glimpsed what slept beneath the gentle surface. A pressure filled the room. It was not physical. It pushed against their minds, their instincts, their very souls. It was the pressure of being in the presence of something so far above them that they could not comprehend it. Like insects trying to understand the sun, warriors who had never bent their knees fell to the ground. Nobles who had ruled conquered worlds covered their faces with their hands. Servants dropped their trays and ran for the doors, screaming in languages they had forgotten they knew. Kathros, the young prince who had started all of this, collapsed completely. He lay on the floor, at Elias's feet, curled into a ball, making sounds that no Kethvari prince had ever made. Sounds of pure, absolute terror. Only old Mithrix remained standing. Her ancient legs shook. Her vision was blurring with tears. But she forced herself to look at the human, to truly look at him. "I knew," she whispered. "The archives warned us. The old species left their warnings. You are the hunters. The ones who never stop. The ones who never forget." Elias turned his empty eyes toward her. For a moment, something almost like recognition flickered in their depths. "Your species," he said, addressing the whole room now, "has existed for 40,000 years. You have conquered 17 worlds. You believe you are the masters of the galaxy." He took one step forward. The frozen guards fell aside like leaves before a wind. "My species has existed for 300,000 years. Did you ever wonder what we were doing for all that time? Did you ever wonder what we were before we built cities and wrote poetry and sent diplomats to other worlds?" He gestured around the great hall with one small, soft hand. The gesture was gentle, almost friendly. "Before we learned to be gentle," he continued, "we were something else. We were the thing that other things feared. We were the reason that creatures on 1,000 worlds evolved to run, to hide, to fight. We were the pressure that shaped life itself." The pressure in the room grew stronger. Some Kethvari fainted. Others began to weep. "We hunted," Elias said softly. "Not like you hunt, with weapons and ships and armies. We hunted with patience, with persistence, with the certain knowledge that no matter how far our prey ran, no matter how well it hid, we would find it. We would always find it, and we would never, ever stop." He looked down at Kethros, still trembling on the floor. "Your prince struck me and drew blood," Elias said. In the old days, before we chose to forget what we were, that would have meant something very different. Zixtal finally found his voice. It came out as a broken croak. What? What do you want from us? Elias looked at him. The pressure eased slightly. The empty look in his eyes faded, replaced by something almost sad. I want peace, he said. I came here wanting peace. I still want peace. I want humanity and the Kethvari to be friends, to trade, to learn from each other, to grow together. He touched the wound on his cheek. It was already healing, closing itself with impossible speed. But you needed to understand something first, Elias continued. You needed to understand that when a human offers you friendship, it is not because we are weak. It is not because we are afraid. It is not because we have no other choice, he smiled. This time, it was almost a real smile, almost warm. It is because we remember what we used to be. We remember the hunger and the hunt and the joy of the chase. We remember the blood and the screaming and the silence afterward. We remember all of it, and we choose every single day to be something better. The pressure vanished completely. The lights stopped flickering. The shadows returned to normal. Elias stood there, small and human and bleeding, surrounded by the terrified rulers of an empire. So, he said quietly, shall we return to our negotiations? I believe we were discussing trade routes. Nobody answered. Nobody could. They were all still seeing behind their eyes. The thing that had looked back at them from the darkness. The thing that was still there. Sleeping, waiting. Wrapped in the skin of a gentle diplomat with a polite smile and patient eyes, the great hall emptied quickly after that night. The Kethvari nobles fled to their quarters and locked their doors. The guards were taken to medical facilities, still unable to speak clearly about what they had seen. Kethros had to be carried away by servants. He kept his eyes closed and refused to open them. Even when his father commanded it, Elias returned to his small room without escort. No one wanted to walk beside him. No one wanted to be close to him. The hallways cleared before him as if by magic. Kethvari pressed themselves against walls or ducked into side passages to avoid crossing his path. He did not seem to notice. He walked calmly back to his quarters, cleaned the blood from his face, and went to sleep. But the rest of the station did not sleep that night, in the deepest archives of the Dominion. Old Mithrix led a team of scholars through records that had not been touched in thousands of years. They worked through the night, opening sealed containers and reading texts in languages that had been dead for longer than their empire had existed. What they found changed everything. The records came from many sources, different species, different times, different parts of the galaxy. But they all told the same story. Long ago, before the Kethvari evolved, before any of the current empires rose to power, something had hunted across the stars. The old texts called them by many names. The Endless Ones, the Patient Death, the Hunters. Who remember, they came from a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system. They looked weak, soft skin. No natural weapons. No armor, no poison. They moved slowly compared to other predators. They could not see well in the dark. They could not hear high frequencies. They could not smell as well as hunting animals, but they had other gifts. They could run. Not fast, but far. Farther than any other creature. They could chase their prey for hours, for days, for weeks, if necessary. When the prey collapsed from exhaustion, the hunters were still coming. They could remember. Not just faces or places, but everything. They remembered every insult and every kindness for generations. They passed stories down from parent to child, keeping hatred or friendship alive for centuries. They could plan. They could wait. They could look at a situation and see not just what was there, but what could be there in 10 years, in 100 years, in 1,000 years, and most terrifying of all, they could cooperate. They shared knowledge freely. When one of them learned something, they all learned it. When one of them was threatened, they all responded. They were individuals, but they moved like a single organism when needed, for millions of years. They had spread across their home world. Every other predator fell before them. Not because they were stronger or faster, but because they simply never stopped. They wore down their prey through patience. They conquered their planet through persistence. Then, the archive said, something changed. The humans developed intelligence. True intelligence. The kind that could look at itself and ask questions. And they looked at what they were, at the hunger that drove them, at the endless need to hunt, chase and conquer. And they chose to stop. This was what the old texts called the Great Forgetting. The humans deliberately buried their predator instincts. They built civilizations designed to suppress the hunt. They created laws and customs and religions that taught kindness instead of conquest. They invented art and music and poetry to replace the thrill of the chase. They pretended to be something else. And they pretended so hard for so long that most of them forgot they were pretending. They stayed on their homeworld for thousands of years, perfecting their disguise. When they finally went to the stars again, they went as explorers, as traders. As diplomats, they went as gentle creatures who wanted only peace. The last entry in the oldest archive was a warning, written by a species that no longer existed. The writing was faded and hard to read, but Mithrix managed to translate it. If you meet the humans, it said, do not be fooled by their softness. Do not mistake their kindness for weakness. They are kind because they choose to be kind. They are gentle because they choose to be gentle. And if you threaten them, if you hurt them, if you remind them of what they truly are, the text ended there. The rest of the document was burned. Mithrix sat back from the archive table. Her hands were shaking. Around her, the other scholars were silent, their faces pale with shock. We need to tell the Supreme Arbiter, one of them finally said. Yes, Mithrix agreed. We do, but I am not sure it will help. I am not sure anything will help now. That morning, Mithrix brought her findings to Zixthal. The Supreme Arbiter listened in silence as she explained what the archives contained. When she finished, he sat very still for a long time. What do you recommend? He finally asked. Apologize, Mithrix said immediately. Give him everything he asks for and more. Send him home with gifts and honors, and pray that he forgives us. Zixthal's mandibles clicked with frustration. You want us to submit? To bow before this creature? I want us to survive, Mithrix replied. I saw what was behind his eyes, my lord. I saw what sleeps inside him. If that thing wakes up fully, if he stops pretending to be gentle... ... She shook her head. The old species did not disappear because of natural disasters or plagues. They disappeared because they threatened the humans. That is what the records show. 17 species in that sector of the galaxy, gone in a single century. Not conquered. Not enslaved. Gone. Zixtal was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was smaller than before. Can we fight them? If we struck first, with all our power. The old empires tried that, Mithrix said. They were stronger than us. They had better weapons, more ships, more soldiers. It did not matter. The humans just kept coming. Year after year, generation after generation. They remembered every attack. They hunted down every attacker. They never stopped. She leaned forward. My lord, our empire has existed for 40,000 years. That seems like a long time to us. But to humans, that is just 100 generations. They think in longer terms than we can imagine. If we become their enemy, they will destroy us. Not today. Maybe not in 100 years. But eventually, certainly, inevitably. Zixtal stood and walked to the window of his chamber. Outside, the station floated in the blackness of space. His empire stretched across 17 worlds. His warriors had never known defeat, but now he understood that none of that mattered. Bring the human to me, he said quietly. I will speak with him. Alone. An hour later, Elias Vance entered the Supreme Arbiter's private chamber. The wound on his cheek was completely healed, leaving no scar. He wore the same simple gray suit he had worn since he arrived. He bowed politely. You wish to see me, Supreme Arbiter? Zixtal studied the human carefully. In the daylight, with the gentle smile back on his face, It was hard to believe this creature was anything dangerous. He looked so harmless, so kind. But now Zixtel knew better. Now he could see, if he looked carefully, the shadow of something vast moving behind those soft brown eyes. "I wish to understand," Zixtal said slowly. "Last night, you could have destroyed us. I felt your power. I saw what you truly are. Why did you stop? Why did you not simply awaken completely?" Elias was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but serious. "Because I did not want to," he said. "Because every day, every moment, I choose to be what I am now instead of what I was then. That is what it means to be human. Not the biology, not the shape of our bodies. The choice. The endless daily choice to be better than our nature." He stepped closer to Zixtal. The supreme arbiter did not retreat. "We are not asking you to fear us," Elias continued. "We are asking you to respect us. To understand that our peace is not weakness. It is the hardest thing our species has ever done. And we do it because we believe it is right." Zixtal bowed his head. For the first time in his long life, he bowed to another creature. "I understand," he said. "And I am sorry. For my son's actions, for our arrogance. For all of it," Elias smiled. It was a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "Then let us start over," he said. "Let us try again, as friends this time. That is all I ever wanted." And in that moment, the mighty Kethvari Dominion and the gentle humans of Earth took their first step toward true peace. The incident in the Great Hall was never officially recorded. When the Kethvari historians wrote about the first meeting between their empire and humanity, they described peaceful negotiations and mutual respect from the beginning. The night when their elite guards froze in terror, when their prince collapsed weeping on the floor, when their supreme arbiter bowed before a soft-skinned creature, was never mentioned, but everyone remembered. 3 months after Ambassador Vance returned to Earth, the Kethvari Dominion announced a formal alliance with humanity. The announcement shocked the galaxy. The Kethvari did not make alliances. They made conquests. They made slaves. They did not treat other species as equals. Yet here they were, sending their own diplomats to the small blue planet called Earth. Here they were, offering trade agreements that favored humanity. Here they were, speaking of the humans with a respect that bordered on reverence. Other species noticed. They paid attention. And quietly, they began to wonder what had really happened on that station. Mithrix was chosen to lead the first Kethvari diplomatic mission to Earth. She was old and tired, and the journey would likely be her last great adventure. But she accepted immediately. She needed to understand these creatures. She needed to see how they lived. The journey took 2 weeks. When her ship entered the Sol system and she saw Earth for the first time, Mithrix felt a strange mixture of emotions. The planet was beautiful, a swirl of blue and white and green. It looked peaceful, inviting, harmless, just like its people. The landing site was near a human city called Geneva. Mithrix stepped off her ship and looked around at the world that had produced the galaxy's most terrifying predators. Birds sang in nearby trees. A gentle breeze carried the smell of flowers. Human children played in a park across the street, their laughter carrying through the air. Ambassador Vance was there to greet her. He looked exactly as he had on the station, small and soft and smiling. But now Mithrix saw him differently. Now she saw the control in every movement, the choice in every gentle word. "Welcome to Earth," Elias said warmly. "I hope your journey was comfortable." "It was adequate," Mithrix replied. She looked around again. "Your world is very ... peaceful." "We worked hard to make it so," Elias said. There was something in his voice, a hint of the weight behind his words. "It took us many thousands of years, many mistakes, much suffering, but we got here eventually." He gestured toward a waiting vehicle. "Come, let me show you our planet." Over the following weeks, Mithrix traveled across Earth. She visited their cities and their wilderness, their monuments and their museums. She met their leaders and their common people, their artists and they're scientists. They're priests and they're philosophers. And everywhere she went, she looked for signs of what she had seen that night in the Great Hall. At first she found nothing. The humans seemed exactly as gentle as they appeared. They helped strangers without expecting anything in return. They stopped to comfort crying children who were not their own. They built hospitals to heal the sick and schools, to educate the young. But then she began to notice other things. She visited a museum that displayed weapons from human history. The weapons were old and primitive by galactic standards, but there were so many of them. Swords and axes and guns and bombs. Tools designed for killing developed over thousands of years. She learned about human wars. There had been many of them. Terrible ones, where millions of their own kind had died. The humans did not hide this history. They taught it in their schools. They built memorials to remember the dead. Why do you remember such terrible things? Mithrix asked Elias as they walked through a memorial for something called the World Wars. Because we must, Elias replied. If we forget what we are capable of, we might become that again. The memory of our worst moments helps us be better. She watched human entertainment. Their stories were full of conflict and struggle and violence. Their heroes often fought and killed. Their villains were frequently just heroes who had made different choices. Your stories are very intense, Mithrix observed after watching something called an action movie. Elias nodded. Our stories let us experience our old instincts safely. We chase and fight and conquer in fiction, so we do not need to do it in reality. It is like exercise for the parts of ourselves we do not want to use. She visited their sports arenas and watched humans compete with desperate intensity. They ran and fought and struggled against each other, their faces twisted with effort and determination. The crowds cheered wildly, feeding on the energy of competition. This is the hunt, Mithrix realized out loud. This is what it looks like when you channel it. Yes, Elias agreed. We compete with each other instead of hunting other species. We direct the instinct inward, where we can control it, where no one has to truly suffer. Slowly, Mithrix began to understand. The humans were not pretending to be gentle. They were not hiding their true nature behind a mask. They were actively, constantly, exhaustingly fighting against their own instincts. Every kind act was a small victory. Every peaceful day was a triumph of will. They did not have peace because they were born peaceful. They had peace because they fought for it, against themselves, every single moment. She thought about her own species. The Kethvari conquered because it was in their nature. They dominated because they were built to dominate. They had never questioned their instincts. They had never tried to be something different. The humans had looked at their instincts, seen the darkness there, and said, no, not this. We will be something else, something better. That was true strength. On her last day on Earth, Mithrix stood in a park and watched human children playing. They chased each other around, laughing and shouting. When one of them fell and scraped his knee, the others immediately stopped playing and gathered around to help. A little girl offered the crying boy her hand. It is okay, she said. We will take care of you. Elias stood beside Mithrix, watching the scene with a soft expression. They are so young, Mithrix said quietly. They do not know what they are yet. No, Elias agreed. And if we do our job right, they never will. They will grow up gentle, because that is all they know. Each generation forgets a little more of the old ways. Each generation is a little more at peace with itself. Mithrix shook her head slowly. I have lived for 300 years. I have seen many things, but I have never seen anything as brave as what your specie. You fight your own nature constantly, Mithrix explained. You suppress instincts that are older than conscious thought. You teach your children to be kind when everything in your biology tells you to hunt. That is not weakness. That is the greatest strength I have ever witnessed. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, and there was something ancient and tired and hopeful in that smile. Thank you, he said simply. Most species only see what we choose to show them. They think we are weak because we are gentle. They do not understand that our gentleness is the hardest thing we have ever done. Mithrix bowed to him, a deep bow of genuine respect. "I will tell my people," she said. "I will tell them what I have learned here. I will tell them that the humans are not weak, prey, pretending to be peaceful. They are ancient predators who conquered themselves, and that makes them worthy of respect. That makes them worthy of friendship." She looked at the children one more time. The boy with the scraped knee was laughing now, running with his friends again, the pain already forgotten. "They win every day," Mithrix said softly, "against 300,000 years of something else, and they do not even know they are fighting a war." Elias nodded. "That is the point. If they knew, it would be harder. We make it easy for them. We make peace feel natural, even though it is not. We build a world where kindness is the obvious choice, even though our ancestors would not recognize it." He put his small, soft hand on her armored shoulder. The touch was gentle, deliberate, chosen. "That is what we offer the galaxy," he said. "Not conquest, not domination. Just the promise that it is possible to be better, that even the worst predators can learn to be kind, that any species, no matter how violent its past, can choose a different future." Mithrix looked at his hand on her shoulder, at his gentle smile, at the children playing in the park, and for the first time in her long life, she began to believe that the galaxy might actually have a chance at peace, not because the strongest species would impose it, but because they would choose it, just as the humans chose, every day, with every breath, to be something more than what they were born to be.